We're so excited to have you all here and to announce the beginning of our great reading series this semester. We're starting with Scott. Next week we have Dana Spiata, who's on a fast track for a Pulitzer, and I want to welcome you all back for that. And then we have our own beloved Roger Rosenblatt. And then we have Sloane Crosley. We have 3 students who have new books coming out this semester. And we have St. John's coming in to do a reading of their professors, and Nicola Ruiz, who graduated from our program and is now teaching comp there. And they'll talk about the comp interface that we're creating with Stony Brook and St. John's. And I'm really delighted to be introducing Scott Sullivan. We all know him as the man who talks about elevators and no alcohol and don't bring your bike and don't bring your dog and here's where the computers are. I won't do the whole speech again. But he's actually a very fine copy editor. He's worked on several magazines. He's currently copy editing TSR for Luann and Susie Merrill, and he's a grammar nudnik. And he's going to really teach us a few things about grammar tonight. So please welcome Scott Sullivan. From behind the curtain. It's on.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to put this on. Okay. So, as I thought, no one was going to sit in the front row, so I get to do this. Are we okay with the cameras? We're okay. All right. So, I'm going to talk to you. It's Grammar Bootcamp. The idea I want to share with you, I'm not going to sit here and talk about grammar rules. I will share some. I will share some things that I see a lot of, that I've seen a lot of in the past. But I want to start by talking about an approach. I'm the director of Stony Brook Manhattan. That's how you know me. I've been here since Stony Brook University opened Stony Brook Manhattan in the fall of 2001. But before that, I had 10 years in magazines. And I started as a writer, journalist, and then became a line editor, a copy editor, a production editor, and then a managing editor. And I'm a proofreader now for the Southampton Review. And all those titles don't mean anything. But along the way, I learned how to be a proofreader, a copy editor, someone who looked at the text on the page differently than just a reader. And I want to try and share that kind of approach. Because for those of you who are students of the MFA program, or those of you who are thinking of finalizing a manuscript for submission to a publishing house or to an agent, you want those people to see the art of your work, and you don't want them to get stuck on grammar mistakes, typographical errors, formatting foibles. You want them to read your art. The faculty here is going to, the semesters that you spend here, the classes you're attending, they're going to help you work on your art. Tonight, I want to try and give you an approach, give you some things to think about that will help you refine that art so that that's all that they see. And there are a couple of steps. So I'm going to talk about doing a close read, then doing a closer read, and then some general areas of focus for both of those reads. So it involves taking your author hat off, putting it aside, and putting on, you have to adopt the role of someone who's going to be happy they find a mistake, which is hard for someone when you're reading your own writing. And you're going to have to take the approach of reading what is there and not thinking about what you had it earlier, how you changed it, what it's become. You need to read what is right in front of you, because the editors, the professors, the people who are doing the final judging of your manuscripts, of your work, your portfolios, they can only read what is there. They can't hear the voice in your head that's saying, yeah, I remember the turn of phrase I had before, and that sort of worked better here, but I'm just going to go over it. You're going to miss what you have on the page. You're going to read that your character turned the corner in your head, because that's what you know your character is doing, but on the page you've written your character is turned the coroner with an extra letter in there. And if you don't read what's there, you're not going to catch mistakes. And that's what I'm here to talk about. You can ask questions along the way. There are some basic grammar rules that we're going to encounter. There are some great typos, things to think about. But it's that approach of taking the time to look at what is in front of you and to remove yourself from the creative process to do that. Now, really good writers find people that they can use to help do that, because it is hard to remove yourself from your writing. It's yours. You created it. But you've got to try and be able to come to a point where you can say, all right, I think I'm really almost done here. I'm done all the big moving of parts, of character arches, of storylines, and I think I'm done. And that's when you should both share it with someone who you won't care, or you will give the instructions to say to them, don't tell me you like or don't like this. I want you to read word by word what's there and tell me if you trip anywhere along the way. And that's the same thing you should do for your own writing. Now, I'm going to talk about one of these three words in a minute. The close read, what I recommend for the close read, and this is something I learned as a production editor, is that if you've got your manuscript and you're doing this on a computer, as I think everyone in the room still is doing now, I would recommend doing your close read with invisibles on in whatever word processing program you're dealing with. And invisibles allows you to see all the little formatting marks that are in there, the dots that are the spaces between words, and the end paragraph symbol, the reverse P. Now, if you know the answer to this, don't shout it out. Does anyone know what that's called? No. All right, I get to teach everyone in the room something today. So the reverse P paragraph sign is one of these three words. It appeared in the New York Sunday Times crossword puzzle this past January. Does anyone know which of the three it might be? Pilcrow for P. Aglet? Okay. So the right name for it, I wanted to be able to teach you all one thing, and I was hoping this could be it, and I'm happy that no one raised their hand in the room. So if nothing else, I've taught you that the reverse P symbol is a pilcrow. And if you didn't know, an aglet is the tag on the end of your shoelaces where the little tight part is, and a welter is a jumble or a mass of things. So, but that close read, I'd recommend turning on the invisible so you can see everything. That's gonna let you see that you hit the space bar twice after a period for one sentence, or that you copy pasted something in and there are three spaces in there and it looks like one when you print it out, but it's not quite right. You're gonna be able to see those things with a close read. What I described before is you're going to need to read that slowly. I'd even recommend blowing up the page so that a single line is fully across the page and you're only seeing 3, 4, maybe 5 lines to force you to read one word at a time across the page. And you're not looking for flowing prose, for stunning metaphor, artistic flair. You're reading what is there, because that's what you've got to catch. And that's your close read. And if you can do that, you're well on your way. The next step is to print it out. Make the changes that you've caught along the way. You've got to take a break. You can't do these both right one after the other, because you're not going to see anything new after that. But then you're going to do a printout. And I'll talk about some of the formatting of printouts in a minute. But what you need to do is print it out and take a look at it. And you're going to, because this is what you're submitting. This is what the professors are going to read. This is what an agent is going to read. This is what an editor is going to read. Only that. Only what's on the page right there. And because of that, you need to read that before you give it in. You know you're done your story. You've finished your work. That's why you've got to take the author hat off and look at what you are submitting. Not what you've created, but what you are submitting. What's there on the page. All right. So the three areas to be looking at during that close read and that closer read, I'm going to talk a bit about grammar, a bit about formatting, and a bit about words. We're all dealing with words, but words can be tricky in ways that don't necessarily apply to grammar or formatting. So some of the faculty of the MFA program were asked for what their pet peeves are, what they see a lot of, what they would hope to see a lot less of. And one of the first things was subject-verb agreement. I will try and illustrate by examples along the way, but singular subjects take singular verbs, plural subjects take plural verbs. She does the work. They do the work. And all that's very simple with those two very simple sentences. But when you start building compound sentences with many different phrases, it gets more difficult. The way to focus in on that is by reading what's there. And if you stumble, if you stop yourself and ask, is that right? That's the time to stop and investigate that sentence. That's what you've got to do. That's what a copy editor does. They're reading along, they're reading what's there, and if they trip, if they stumble, that's when you need to stop and look. Do you have a formation where you're using or, where you have Paul and Claire doing the work in one sentence, but Paul or Claire does the work in the next sentence? That's the way it's supposed to be, but when you're using or, it takes the singular, and Paul and Claire take the plural, and it goes that way. But if you trip because you've filled the sentence with more words, more description, and you're not following that, that's when you need to stop and investigate. I used to do witch hunts on the manuscripts that were sent to me. They were called witch hunts because the that which usage is one that trips up a lot of writers. Very particularly, that is a restrictive pronoun. Which is a relative pronoun. And I gave you a link that gives a much better description of the details of what that means. That's in the Getting It Right grammar page over here. Which, if you're using the word which to describe something that precedes it, it will almost always invariably follow a comma. So the dreams, comma, which keep me awake every night, comma, scare me. That sentence can also be rearranged without the commas and changing which to that. The dreams that a similar sentence. The dreams that I have are scary. Now that illustrates the difference between restrictive and relative. But where people get mixed up is they will have a noun and a comma following it, and then they will try to describe, put in a descriptive clause after that, leading with that. And that is incorrect. That's not the way it goes. So I would take a manuscript when I got it, and if I encountered that error once early on, I'd stop and do a global search for which, and look at each instance of where which is used, and just circle it in the manuscript, if I had it both printed out and on screen, and circle it so that I knew when I came down to it that this was an author who had used which incorrectly, and then I could move down, and every time I saw that, be ready to check that. So that's an area you can, if you find out, if you aren't sure that you're using it correctly, that you can look and use that. When to use I and when to use me. The simple grammar lesson is I is the subjective pronoun used as the subjects of sentences, and me is the objective pronoun. She went out with me. I, the subject, went out with not she, but with her. And you have the ability as an author, you can write in the speaking vernacular of your characters, and you're allowed to make all kinds of grammatical errors there. That's how people talk. But when you're writing, if you're not writing in dialogue the way a character is either thinking or speaking, you've got to make sure that the subject, you're using the subjective pronouns, I, he, she, they, and for the objects, you're using the objective ones. When to use who and whom. People fall into using whom because they think it sounds more educational. But who let the dogs out? Who? Who? But the dogs were let out by whom? So if you just keep that in your head, anytime you have the question about whether you should be using who or whom, that's there for you. And if you make the mistake once and you remember that song forever, you'll know that that is what you need to be using. Who is always the subject. It takes the verb. Whom is the object of an action, is not the action itself.
Can I interrupt? Okay, so the one to use I, one to use me, where I see it most improperly used is when someone writes something and ends a very long thing on, like, John and I or John and me.
Ending it on.
They come along with John and I. I hear that a lot, and we never say they come along with I, but for some reason when they're mixing a name and
Right, so putting John and me or John and I, that kind of phrase, depending on where you're using it. So as a copy editor, what I would do was take out the conjunction, the John and that would help me understand which one. So they went along with John and me, or they went along with John and I. They went along with me. That's who they went along with. They went along with John and me. Now people will think John and I went with them. That's correct, but depending how the sentence is structured, if you drop the other part, the with the and, it can help clarify for you whether it's a subjective pronoun is needed or an objective pronoun. The apostrophe, that's a deliberate mistake. Apostrophes don't pluralize, except in very rare instances with numbers. The actual number, I had 4 ones, the numeral ones, and even then that's more of a style issue you need to work out with what your editor, professor, agent does. Publications have their own house style guides and how they handle numbers and plurals. Some people will say ones with the number 1 with just an S, some not. So but apostrophes for words should never be thought of as a way to pluralize something. And then brought out today by someone who's visiting, which is something that is very often done, dependent clauses. When we're writing, we write. Then we rewrite, and we add more details, and we rewrite again. And we may lose what was the original subject of a sentence, where we're talking about Christina Amanpour, and that she's a journalist, and that she was born in Ohio. And we have a sentence about that. But then we also start writing about Christina Amanpour's writing and how good it is as a journalist. And we have a descriptive phrase at the beginning of the sentence, born in Ohio, comma, Christina Amanpour has great writing. But then we've done some work on it, and we've changed it to born in Ohio, comma, Christina Amanpour's writing has won her several awards. The subject of that sentence is Christina Amanpour's writing, and that wasn't born in Ohio. She was. And you can get into trouble when you've got more description there, or it's not clear what the subject is and what the preceding modifying dependent clauses are supposed to be describing. The dependent clause is describing the subject of that sentence. And Christina Amanpour's writing was not born in Ohio. So the formatting question. From my days as a production editor, you learn to quickly to ask the question, what is being asked for? And as a student, you should ask that of your faculty and wherever else you're sending it. You've got to know what they want. You don't want them looking at what you've submitted and their first thought being, it's wrong, just because it's not triple spaced and in a 12-point font. And you find that ridiculous and you're wasting paper. but you've got to understand what you're being asked for. It's the very first thing you need to find out, and it's the very first thing you need to have right. Because having it wrong, at least in a publishing house, you might not even get read if they have formatting requirements. If you're submitting for prizes, for contests, you want to not be knocked because you didn't follow the instructions. And it's simple. But there are people who don't, who think that their writing is their writing and someone's going to read my writing and it'll be valued for what I wrote and what I created. But if you don't follow the formatting, you're taking the chance that they won't even look at your writing. So,
I was going to say on that one, I had a friend who wrote a great book that she stretched the margins and submitted it in 11-point font and nobody would read it. She just thought it looked better that way. She wasn't trying to,
make a statement, yeah. So you've got to know what you're delivering, because if you don't deliver what's asked for, they might not even look at it at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that happens in playwriting and screenwriting all the time. They're opposite formats, as far as dialogue and the action goes. And I can't tell you the number of stage plays I've read or a screenplay format, and it drives me insane.
Right. You may not know it's wrong. You may not think it's wrong. But if you don't answer the question to yourself, what is the requested format, and understand that answer, you're submitting it to people who do know it's wrong or will think it's wrong, and they're not going to value it nearly as much. They might not even look at it at all. So it's key to match the specifications. Now, talking about punctuation, proper punctuation with periods, semicolons, commas, there's a lot I could say about all of those. I'm going to tell you a few things. But the general thinking is punctuation, you're given the power to pause the reader, to offer an aside, to exclaim, to question, all of those things. That's what punctuation lets you do. But overuse of punctuation or improper use of punctuation is going to stop the reader and stop them in a bad way. They're not going to know what you wanted them to do right there. So if you cause the reader to stumble, they're not going to see your art. I'm going to keep coming back to that, but that's what happens. If your words don't flow, they're going to get stuck. So briefly, the period, it's one space after a period. You doing that close read with the invisibles on, you can catch that. If you find even one mistake that way, we used to run manuscripts through a global search, searching for double spaces. I would caution you against the power of global changing any double space, however, any global changing anytime, because you want to see where those instances are that you're changing something in case there's a reason that's not clear to you why you're changing it. I would rarely ever do a global search and replace for anything. Even someone's name change, where it was a story I had written and I was changing a character's name and it hadn't been done yet. But I would still go through every instance to know that you were doing it in the right way, in the right spacing, and that it worked. Not global search and replace. Yes?
Is the one space after a period a new thing? Because I was really taught in elementary school or whatever.
When I was taught typing in...
Semicolons and spaces after period.
Right, when I was taught, well, let me take it back then. When I was taught typing in 7th or 8th grade, it was 2 spaces after the period, and that's what it was. And then desktop publishing, after I graduated, and what the magazine formatting was, and what book formatting has been that I've been a part of, it's always been single space after period. And it goes back to that formatting question of finding out, what are you submitting for? If it's not stated, I would go with the single space after a period. I don't know about screenplays or plays, whether you want more space there, but.
But don't you go through TSR and take out any double spaces?
Yes, I look for them for the eye. You can see that the space is too big and it causes me, the reader, to stumble. It doesn't continue on. It looks like something was supposed to have been there and has been removed, and now there's more space than there should be. Yes?
Also, I think it became a print thing because it takes up too much space, and column inches are really at a premium. So the less space, extra spaces you have, and it doesn't look funny. I used to make global changes on all faculty came in because everybody learned the typing rule.
Right.
And so I replaced all two spaces in one space before I even went in linear view.
Mm-hmm.
Just to start with. But I think it's a space thing as well as the way it looks on the page. I'm not sure if it matters personally, but it's about a printed page.
Right, column inches, fitting in the columns and spreading out that way. So briefly, semicolons. They can serve the same function as commas when separating a list of several long phrases. Otherwise, semicolons can help you connect closely related ideas. And then the link I provided has a really great breakdown of how semicolons can be properly used or not used. If I run across a sentence that's is using a semicolon and I'm not sure whether it's right, I go check a reference, because there are rules that I don't always remember. What I do remember is that it's a place that it could be right and it could be wrong. And if I'm not 100% sure, as a copy editor, as a line editor, I stop and I seek out a reference. You as writers should do the same thing. If you're not 100% sure, you shouldn't just go over it thinking, yeah, I think I used the semicolon the right way.
The simplest rule that we had was that you could put a sentence on either side of a semicolon. You can be a big sentence by itself, but you can't use a semicolon if you have the same subject and you separate the semicolon. You can't use a verb that's the first subject again. So you have to use a comma. You can use another verb for that same subject.
Right.
So you have a subject and a verb. You can have a semicolon and another subject and a verb. That's your breakdown, as well as the sequence. The main thing, the main idea was it has to be two complete thoughts.
Right.
It can't be one carryover. The semicolon stops the carryover.
Right. And the flip side of that is you can't have that with a comma. You can't have two subjects, two verbs set apart just by a comma. That's two separate sentences, and that's incorrect, which you would also see. And that link shows that where comma works and where semicolon works and where the two don't. So it's a good link to have. You may be wondering why in the handout I say comma saves lives. It's true. You may know where you want the reader to pause. And every time you read that first sentence, you know you're asking grandma if it's time to eat or telling her it's time to eat. But you're not. If you're inviting grandma to eat or asking her to start dinner, it's got to have the comma in there. You've got to be talking. Otherwise, you're resorting to cannibalism, and it's not the same meal. So, commas are a powerful piece of punctuation. If you're writing, you know where you want the reader to pause. But when I go back to telling you need to do that close read, you've got to read what's there. And if you're pausing and there's nothing there and you know you want that pause to be there, you've got to figure out how to get it in there with the proper punctuation. And if you're running across punctuation that's causing you to pause and you're thinking to yourself that you didn't want that, you've got to figure out how to rewrite or rework that sentence or use the right punctuation, or remove the punctuation that's causing you to pause where you shouldn't. So I'm now going to go back to dialogue. We could spend an entire evening on dialogue and the different ways that complicate punctuating dialogue. Melissa Bank, a faculty member of the MFA program, has a very good sheet that she shared with me that you all have. It's got 17 different instances of how to punctuate dialogue, what to do in different circumstances, because it's different in a lot of those circumstances. And where to use the double quotation marks, how to open them, how to close them. Patrick, could you give one to the Yes, we've got plenty at the back. I want you to have one in there. So that, I'm not going to go through any of those. But having those, you can see all the different instances. What is needed, where you open and close the quotation marks. You may recognize a few names in the examples there. They are purely fictitious sentences, though they do involve people you may know from the program. But that is a really good primer on quotation marks. And it's something that lots of people get wrong. You've got a question, you're quoting a question. Does the question mark go inside the quotation marks or outside the quotation marks? So I'm not going to go into a long discussion of that. I will come back to the marks themselves. No, this is the part where I do this. I am going to also talk about the marks themselves. So what you see on the screen right now in this I like dialogue, those are smart quotes. There are dumb quotes. Dumb quotes are the straight quotes used to indicate inches and feet when you're indicating measurements. And I believe, from as often as I am seeing this error now, a lot of writers write on whatever device they have with them. So that there's some creative process going on and you're writing on your mobile phone, you're writing on a tablet, you're copy-pasting text from some source into your manuscript. And right now, anyway, Word and most other word processing programs don't automatically convert dumb quotes, the straight ones, which are what appear on most phones, smartphones, tablets, to double quotation marks, the curved ones that open and close as they should, and apostrophes don't go the right way. They stay straight. And so I will read manuscripts in TSR where I can tell there is a passage that has been copy-pasted into a manuscript. The apostrophes have been fine above. There's a 3-line paragraph where the 2 apostrophes in that come in as straight, and then everything after that is fine again. And I know as a production editor for how things are built and put together, or I'm assuming, that it was brought in from another source. And it was never caught, or it was never looked at or changed. And it is wrong. It is not something that you can get away with. They are not right. You need opening and closing quotes. You need apostrophes or single quotation marks that turn the right way for your contractions, depending on what you're contracting and what you're taking out. And it's critically important that you look that closely at what's on the page, at what's in front of you, on what's on the screen. So no dumb quotes. Know that if you are copy and pasting something in, put 3 asterisks there in the text, and you'll go back and look at it, and you'll know that there's probably going to be something wrong in there that you'll be able to find. And then Magdalene also solicited questions from students, and one of the ones that came up was one I needed to look up because I didn't remember the answer. Did I go back? The bottom one here, when to use italics or double quotation marks for various titles. The rule that I didn't remember was italics are used for the titles of longer things, more complete things. Music albums, book titles, television series. But if someone is quoting a song from an album, that gets double quotation marks. When someone's quoting the name of a chapter or an essay in a group of essays, or a television episode's title, those get double quotation marks. There are arcane rules that we could go on and on about. That was one that got asked, so I thought I'd provide the answer. Yes?
That's one where you really should ask the requested format.
Right.
Because TSR has particular rules about italicizing almost every title there is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of newspapers and magazines will italicize book titles.
Right.
Some will do periodicals, some won't. So that's really about requested format.
So when The question to ask, is there a requested format? You also need to ask, is there a house style guide? Because some publications, some places will follow the Chicago Manual of Style, but they will have their exceptions, and they will have a house style guide. And they will either tell you, follow Chicago Manual of Style, and they'll take care of the exceptions themselves, or they'll share both with you, and you'll be able to work with everything and know that you're getting it as right as possible. It's a little further along in the word section, but rules change. I'm going to share with you a copy editing rule that was ingrained in me when I started. It was my second year in magazine publishing. It was something that I was told to catch every time. There was no question about it. It's now used, that rule it's only in my pencil now. No one else I know wields it, and I now offer it without it being a tried and true steadfast rule. So that's a good conversion to words. So I'm going to talk about spelling. I'm going to talk about spell check. I'm going to talk about word choice of two different kinds. I'm going to talk about word usage and pairs of words that go together and don't go together. And these are all examples still of things that if you see and you read when you are reading your text close and closer, one word at a time, these are potential problems. These are areas that you can get stuck. And the reasons are, so spell check is always your friend. It's a great thing to have while you're writing. That's the first sentence. Spell check is not always your friend, because every word in that second sentence is perfectly spelled and is 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are completely wrong for the sentence. And spell check will not help you at all. And particularly when you're writing quickly, when you're thinking, when you're writing fast to get your thought down on paper, you're just going to write. That's fine. That's why you do that close and closer read, because you've got to read, right? You've got to read the word that's on the page. You've got to read that not is not two ends of a rope tied together, that you mean the negative without the K. You've got to read what is on the page.
Do you have any advice for the anxiety that finding those things bring up?
No, because if you found one, if you know it's one that you do often, that should be comforting, because you'll know to then search for it. Like, if you do it all the time, it means you need to become a very careful reader, or to get someone you know very well who will be a very careful reader for you. Because only by reading what the word is are you going to be able to catch those. If you build up your own stable of things that you know you often get wrong, that's great, because then you can search for those specifically. If you make homophone errors all the time, that's tricky. And I'll show you the different, I gave you a handout of different homophones and links to, there's a website that lists everyone in the English language. And we'll get to that in a second. They're hard, and there are different levels of hard. It's easy to know when always. It's easier to find that as a mistake when you know it should be, if someone has written always this way and they meant this rather than the other way around. And so you can get really stuck unless you are really reading the word that is in front of you. So there are some common mistakes that copy editors find that they run across a lot. Prospective and perspective. You want to get the proper prospective on something, or you want to get the proper perspective. There's a saying that you can see written in lots of places incorrectly. The second instance here is incorrect. For all intensive purposes is incorrect. It's for all intents and purposes. And spell check won't help you here. And if you don't know what the phrase means or is trying to convey and you're just writing it to write it because you think it fits in there, you're not going to catch it either. But a copy editor is going to send it back. And you've got to understand that those two are common and egregious errors to make, and there are more like them. But that goes to word choice, making sure you know you're choosing the right word. And if you look at that list of homophones or sound-alike words, or start to get familiar with the words that trip up people, you can then stop and double-check that you've used the right word. Here are some other rules. Definite rules, wondering whether to use less or fewer. Less is used with something that you can't count. You have less salt in a recipe, but you use fewer tablespoons of salt. And that is definitive. That is tried and true. And if you're using less and you're using fewer in a sentence and you're not sure which one it should be, stop. Think and try and remember the rule or look up the rule. You've got to be able to check a reference. And hopefully this handout is now a reference for that rule right there. This is the rule I was talking about before. When I was taught how to be a copy editor, over meant on top of. Over only meant on top of. It was a direction. It was a place. You could never have over 100 submissions to a contest. You could have more than 100 submissions to a contest, but never over. I think for the same reason, well, I don't know if it's the same reason, possibly for space reasons, over has become accepted to be, sorry, there's a shaking head in the background.
I have the same rule. I believe in it. I don't believe it should have ever changed.
I don't either.
I always change it.
And
I was thrilled.
you will now know why it may be offered as a change. You will see it once you start being tuned into it. You will see it everywhere in advertising, especially in advertising, on the subway. Mm-hmm. Right, and I will always change it, or I will offer. I've said it this way before. I will always offer it as a change, because I believe over is still a direction reference. That's what it means to me. That's what I was taught. It has become more accepted. That does make finding a reference for you difficult. That is the reason you always go back to what is the required or requested format, and is there a style guide? You want to know what you're being asked to submit. All right, simple things. By reading closely or close or closer, doing those two reads, you should be able to tune into the fact of whether you're using a one word, a particular word, too often in a paragraph. You will only do that by reading it to yourself one word at a time, and you'll just hear it, and you'll hear that it's repeated too often.
Say about that, I just read an article in the New York. Did anyone read the piece on John McCain? He had a computer that picked up the use of the same word within 8 lines. The computer did that kind of sort of thing, even random exotic words. And then it also picked up larger words that should not be used more than once in an entire document. He programmed his computer to do those things.
Mm-hmm. So this is another thing that this last one on the page here, the second one, was one given by faculty in the MFA program, by more than one faculty person. Right. And I don't think it means it's just one person submitting these that is bothering many faculty. I think it's something they're seeing from many sources. And it's a hard one to teach or discuss, because you just need to know whether it's right or wrong, or you need to know that it's the possibility of an error. So what the faculty are seeing, they are seeing someone write, Peter was confounded for the problems in front of him, when they are confounded by the problems in front of him. Or when someone is enamored with something when it should be enamored of, excuse me. And now that you know that those are two things that can trip you up, you should be careful using them and to check whether you're using them correctly. The hardest part about proofing your own work is if you believe everything you've written is right, you're never going to catch where you're wrong, because you're going to read over your mistakes. And that's where you need to know where to look. The end. So in that first close read online, when you find an error, this is when you find an error that you often make, then you got to add it to a list of things that you search for all the time. And then until you have the rule ingrained in you where you are always 100% sure, that should be something, that error should be something that you look for. Then, this came out of being a production editor. When you make a change, you need to check around that change that your correction hasn't introduced a mistake. And that's key. In particular, when you're doing that closer read, where you've circled your errors and you've gone then into the manuscript to fix it, then you're reprinting that final submission copy. I would not part with that submission copy until you check the spots where you have circled something to change and what you have changed it to. Because yours will be the single time to see that change. And everything else has gone through multiple reads. Hopefully you've shared it with other people. But if you're making a last change, that's the best or worst possible time to introduce a mistake, because no one else is reading it. So that's the end. And hopefully all of that, the papers that are shared, the examples, give you a way of looking at your work close and even closer to try and find the places where readers would stumble, where you have a small question in your mind about whether you're using the right word the right way, and allowing you to take the time to stop, research it, figure out what's 100% right, and change it. Now, I would love to take questions or have more comments. Yes?
No, I just wanted to say, I think that everything you're saying is so true, and I just wanted to underscore it as somebody who has also worked as an editor, which is that a lot of these seem like really simple little mistakes, but the fact is that if you make one or two or three of these, the editor's first opinion is going to be, you don't know how to write. They're never going to see the art. They're never going to see what wonderful expression you have, what wonderful creativity you have. They're going to say, this person doesn't know how to write. And they're not going to get any farther. So the close read thing is really important. I think the invisibles really help to make you break it down word by word, because when it's like that, it doesn't flow.
Yep.
So carefully, so you separate each word by the invisibles, that helps. Two other things that help me and help other people is have a pen in your hand. Do it on paper, not just on the computer. When you print that one out for the closer read,
Right.
have a pen in your hand and be looking for something to mark. Take the pen and go over each word. It's like having invisibles. And the last thing is to read aloud.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you will, if you're reading in your head, you know you wrote it, so you will supply the missing word. That editors will see right away there's a word missing, but you'll supply it in your brain. But if you have to make the word sound by reading it aloud, you'll know that the word isn't there, or you'll know that the verb doesn't agree because it sounds weird. It doesn't sound weird in your head. It sounds fine in your head, but if you say it out loud,
Yep.
and the only way that I've been able to do that, if you're trying to get people to do this, by reading this stuff aloud in class.
Right.
And that can be very embarrassing. So you want to read it aloud yourself before it gets read aloud by somebody else.
Yeah. That's 100% right. And I didn't say that because as an editor, I'm reading other people's work. I can read aloud in my head. But as you, the author, you can't. And that's exactly why. You will read right over what you think should have been there, and you need to read the words that are there, and by reading aloud, you will.
And that's also how to know that you're not repeating words.
You'll hear them.
Editors see that right away. They see that word, they say, I just saw that word. I know I just saw that word. You don't see it because you thought it was a great word. You liked it so much, you used it 3 times.
Yeah. Are there questions about specific things? Yes.
I do. I came across one the other day.
And I'm not pretending to say I will know the answers to these questions right off the cuff. We're connected to the internet. We can
The
check.
sentence is, for years, he checked his reflection when he walked past store windows. The same sentence is, for years, he would check his reflection when he walked past store windows. Is one more correct, and is there a difference in meaning between the two?
My instinct is to say no difference in grammatical.
How about suggestion?
Sure,
Tone?
yes, but an editor or someone proofing a piece won't know which way the author is wanting to go, whether you want them to be walking first and catching the reflections second, or the emphasis on the reflection first while walking.
Well, there's a tiny difference in these. The first one without the word, this is what I heard is that that is where he looks at his reflection. And the second one means it was a habitual thing that he did.
Always did and did it at this location.
For years he checked it, it's like that's like instead of using a year,
Right.
you could infer that.
But the fact that you said for years means you did it habitually. You've already established that you did it habitually by saying you did it for years.
Right.
So it is a question of, by inserting the would, you make it a little bit more of a repetitive thing. It's more obsessive compulsive with the would in there than just as a matter of habit. But I agree, it's a tonal thing.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask yourself questions like that when you're running across your reading, because editors will do that. They will wonder whether what you wrote matches with what has preceded it, and they will ask back questions. I'm proofing right now. I'm asking back questions. Would it be better if this? Ask yourself that. You know what follows. You've read what's come to that point. What's going to work for what you're wanting that character, that sentence to do?
I've never heard of the invisible horizontal change.
Are you working in Word? Okay, so in Word, if you look at the formatting menu across the top, there's going to be I'm going to draw it really large. They use the pilcrow as the symbol for invisibles. It looks like the backward. If you click that, it will then show you all the spacings, the invisibles. It will put a dot in between two words where a space would be. And you will see a single floating dot halfway up off the baseline. And it will indicate that that's a space. Every hard return at the end of a paragraph is going to have a pilcrow. Anything that has snuck in there, usually tabs tend to sneak in where in paragraphs that don't belong there, but then are squished because of where the tabs are set for that page, and it's the same size as a space, but you're sending it off somewhere else, and it gets put in somewhere else, and suddenly that tab is 10 letters wide because that's how it's formatted there. You'll see a horizontal arrow showing that that's a tab and not a space, and you'll be able to say, well, wait, this is just between two words. That should be a dot, a floating dot for a space. And it shows you what you have typed that aren't letters. It's basically what it's showing you.
I would like to say, in addition to that, because I just submitted a manuscript and I have to do it in Word and PDF. And because some of my documents had automatic indents at the
Yep.
beginning of a paragraph, and some had
A tab. Yeah.
When it converted to PDF, I had to go through and check that each
Yes.
tab had tab, or indent had indent.
Formatting, yeah. You want your final manuscript, your final piece to be all the same. You don't want paragraphs where you hit spacebar 5 times to indent that paragraph, and you tabbed on the second one, and then everything that followed you put formatting for paragraphs on, and it's automatically indented 5 spaces. Because if you submit that electronically anywhere and they do anything with it, those 3 paragraphs formatted differently but looking exactly the same on the page are going to be rendered, are possibly going to be rendered differently, depending on what's done with them. So turning on the invisibles should show you that you are consistent. And consistency is what you want, what you have to have. Yes?
I have a question about like parenthetical statements. Do you put a space after the word, or can you just like put it right on the last word? I usually like to do that.
Yes. So parentheses, something within parentheses, words follow right, letter follows right, no spacing between the parentheses and the text. But a word about parentheticals of all sorts, em dashes, parentheses, parentheticals, be careful using them. If you use them too often, you will cause the reader to be stopping too often. And they won't be reading along, they'll be stopping and stopping. It works very well for thought, where people's thoughts are jumbled. There's a piece I've just read that had parentheses, em dashes, semicolons, and colons. All of those in which was a 10-line paragraph. And for the most part, they were correct. But that doesn't mean they should have all been there. Because, I mean, even just looking at it visually, it looks too full of too much, and it's not a written paragraph. So be careful overusing that. Em dashes are favorites. They're a favorite of mine. I use them a lot. Just don't overuse them and don't get stuck using them. Yes? So an em dash is a long dash as opposed to a hyphen is a single dash. An em dash is formed for you in most word processing programs by putting 2 hyphens together with text on either side of it. If you type the letter A, hyphen, hyphen, the letter B, and then a space, those 2 hyphens will change to an em dash, which is a much wider dash. There's also something called an en dash, which I could talk to you about with compound adjectives and when to use an en dash to signify the modifier, but I decided not to because that's a little too arcane. But em dashes will happen automatically in most word processing programs. You can use them to set off things. You can also often use commas to set off things, not always the same things though. That's where it gets tricky. But don't use them too much. Yes?
I can't think of the sentence, but I've had people write passive. In other words, is that incorrect to write in the passive, or is it?
It is not wrong. It is not active. It is not strong. The car was passed by the bicycle. The bicycle passed the car. You have action in the second example. You have a description of action in the first example. That's what's different. And too much writing, I had this problem. My writing was, I wrote passive voice far too much. It can be slow and it can be boring. It isn't active. Now, when you're trying to describe something, that can be the way it happened. You are describing what happened. But you need to think about action if someone's bringing that up a lot.
I just had a question about that example. It's like, could you stylistically, because the car is being passed, leave it passive for that reason?
Yes. It's just an example of the passive tense of the verb, the passive verb usage. The car wasn't doing anything, it was passed. Now, how do you make that active? The active part was the bike. Yes?
Okay, I always get confused with weighing and lying.
There's a reason they're not up here. Because I circle and I consult. I will not attempt to speak the rule because I fear I would make the mistake. So especially with laying, lying, and past participle, I circle it and check. That's on my personal list of ones I don't have the rule down, and I go check it.
Mind mirroring and mood mirroring, like, that's something,
I don't know the rule on that. If I trip on it, I go look at it. I go look it up.
can you tell them what the issue is? Use it in a sentence.
If I understand what you're asking, my nearing the thermometer caused it to go up. Me nearing the thermometer caused it to go up. So does my describe the nearing, or are you trying to say, is it the person getting nearer that was causing, and the difference between the two? But I would still stop and look.
So the rule, someone said to me, it's always the mind.
My nearing, the pronoun, okay.
Do you have a rule on that, Andrew?
No, it's just that I think the reason you got that rule is because it sounds like the objective me is being the subject of a verb, which it's really not. It's being sort of the object of that gerund or that participle, which is me nearing it. So my nearing is just clear, and again, it's what makes you stop. If me nearing makes people stop because it sounds like the objective going into a verb, then you don't want to use it. Anything that makes people stop, you don't want to use it unless your intention is to get them to stop.
Right.
Like, what's up with this person?
Where do you look it up?
That's a good question. So on the bottom of the Getting It Right pages are a couple of links to common grammar mistakes that lots of writers make. So you can become uncommon by not making those. And then there's the Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, is simple and effective, and if you can read it or refer to it, it will help you. Not written down there at the bottom of the references is understanding what the request is of where you're handing it in. If they do Chicago manual style or if they do AP style, those are different. And they're going to value or devalue your work whether you follow along what they've set aside. Times uses, I believe they have their own style. It's mostly
There's a New York Times
style guide, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to ask one question for the students' work process. What I've noticed in the finishing of sending something out is how much time it takes to really read it and read it and read it and
Yeah.
read it and read it. And I think you as an editor have learned to bill your hours but your skill to like how much time, if a student had like a 300-page
Right.
manuscript, would you have them set aside? Would it be weeks? Would it be,
Yeah, so I've had this written in my comments, but it didn't come out. The close read and the closer read happen at the end. That's when they need to happen. But they aren't short. They aren't, it is not that last quick read that you're just glossing through. These are intense and detailed, and it takes time. And what are we going to do it by words? 250 pages of word. It takes me 10 to 15 minutes to do a page of TSR, a read, because that'll include, and I think that's 200 words, and that's not my text, and so I'm not familiar with it, and I'm not reading it quickly, but that will allow me to, when I am stopped, the time to research things and look them up and check them and circle them or come back to them. And you've got to read that slowly, and you've got to be ready to take that much time. It's not, I'm finishing it, I finished my writing at 10 p.m. and I'm going to allot an hour for this 30-page essay or this short story. It's not that quick. I don't have a good rubric or a good math formula for what it is, but it really isn't quick. It's not something you can do and just knock it off.
I would say one other thing for students is that we had a number of students who thought that this gnarly work could be someone else's to do. Like they would turn their book in, which was full of their creativity and passion, and an editor would come along and sweep up all the debris, and I think that's a big error in thinking.
So I double and triple check this with Magdalene before, and I'll say, that's okay. Your final portfolio, your final, whatever you're submitting, has to be as right as possible, because it will be downgraded if it isn't. Forget for the moment submitting it to a publishing house. You have the potential to not succeed, pass, if you have too many mistakes. It has to be right. Now, what Magdalene said, though, you could also take it. It is 100% true that you could pay someone to do that cleanup work. That's what I do on a freelance basis. That's what lots of people do. And you can have friends who can do it well for you, help you complete your work. But that doesn't allow you to think that you can write what you're going to write and then let someone else clean it up in this program, in this MFA program, or in any submission process. Your work won't get seen, it won't get selected, it won't won't receive highest grades if it has those mistakes. You can pay someone to do it. You can get your partner, your roommate, whoever you're living with, who's really anal and will read it and enjoy finding every mistake you've made. And if you have one of those, you're in a really good place, because that will help your work be better. And don't lose that roommate or partner. But you can't not have that process happen. And what I did tonight was to try and tell you how you can do that process.
Great, thank you.
I moved there. I finally moved.